Good day everyone, especially to you Ma'am Almira Buncales. I am Shane Angel Pairis and this is my pre-recorded video about the novel which is entitled To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. So who was Virginia Woolf? Virginia Woolf's real name is Adeline Virginia Stephen. She was born on January 25, 1882 at London, England. She was died on March 28, 1941 at the age of 59 at the River Ouse in East Sussex, England. She was a novelist, essayist, and publisher critic. Virginia Woolf in 1882 to 1941 was an English author. Her book To the Lighthouse is one of her famous novels, along with Mrs. Dalloway and the Waves. In her fiction, Woolf is known for her use of stream of consciousness as a narrative device. Using this technique, Woolf shows the natural flow of internal thoughts in her characters, often switching between different characters' mental perspectives. Woolf was also an advocate for the women's rights movement and published the nonfiction essay A Room of One's Own, in which she analyzes gender and socioeconomic class to describe the experience and the needs of female writers at the time. Additionally, she was involved in the Bloomsbury Group, a group of writers and intellectuals in Bloomsbury, England during the first half of 20th century. To the Lighthouse is a novel originally published in 1927 by English author Virginia Woolf. The novel centers on the Ramsay family and the vacation they take at their summer house on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. Woolf uses shifting perspectives to reveal characters through their inner thoughts and stream of consciousness. The novel is divided into 3 parts. Before we proceed to the story of the lighthouse, I will introduce first the characters. So first is Mrs. Ramsay, the mother of the Ramsay family. In section 1 or in part 1, she promises her son to go to the lighthouse, argues with her husband, and hosts friends in the family's summer house in Scotland. In part 2, she dies, but her cause of death is not stated. The next is Mr. Ramsay, the father of the Ramsay family. In part 1, he denies his wife and son to go to the lighthouse, argues with his wife, and hosts friends at the summer house. In part 2, he is distraught after the death of his wife and 2 children, si Pro ug si Andrew. And then, si James, Pro, Andrew, Camelia, Jasper, Roger, Rose, and Nancy is Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay's son and daughter. The next is Lily Briscoe, a friend of Ramsay family and a painter. In part 1, Lily is working on portrait of Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay, but when a group of friends gather at the Ramsay house and another friend, Charles Stanley, says that women cannot write or paint, Lily starts to doubt herself. Then the second is Charles Stanley, a friend of the Ramsay family. In part 1, Charles admires Mr. Ramsay's work as a philosophy professor and insults Lily when he says that women cannot paint or write. Then next is Augustus Carmichael, a friend of Ramsay family and a poet. In part 1, at the Ramsay's dinner party, Augustus asks for a second bowl of soup, which angers Mr. Ramsay. Next is Paul Riley and Minta Doyle, friends of the Ramsay family who have become engaged and thanks to Mrs. Ramsay. However, they are late to the Ramsay's dinner party in part 1, which angers Mrs. Ramsay. Then the last character is Mrs. McNabb, the Ramsay's housekeeper at their summer house. During part 2, she is the only character whose internal monologues are featured. Since she is not part of the family or a close friend, she provides more of an objective, distant account. So let's proceed to the summary of To the Lighthouse. So as what I have said earlier nga, ang summary sa Lighthouse is divided into 3. So sa part 1 is the window. The novel opens with James Ramsay asking his mother, Mrs. Ramsay, if they can go to the lighthouse the following day. Mrs. Ramsay tells James they should be able to go, but Mr. Ramsay says they can't go because the weather is not going to be agreeable. This causes both Mrs. Ramsay and James to feel resentment towards Mr. Ramsay. So sa part 1, si James Ramsay nangutana sa iyang mama o makadung ba sila sa lighthouse inig kasunod adlaw. Nitubag ang iyang mama nga o daw makadung sila. Pero pag ingon sa iyang papa dili daw kay lain ang panahon. Mauto nalain si James ug iyang mama sa iyang papa nga si Mr. Ramsay. Later, some friends come to visit the Ramsay family, including Lily Briscoe, who is painter, creating a portrait of Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay. Another friend, Charles Tansley, makes comments that women cannot paint or write, and he also praises Mr. Ramsay's work as a philosophy professor. These comments make Lily feel anxious and doubtful about herself in general and her specific portrait she is currently working on. And then, after adto, paghuman adto, naay mga friends na ning bisita sa Ramsay family. Apil na adto si Lily Briscoe, isa ka painter nga maoy naggama sa portrait nila Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay. Si Charles Stanley pod nga lain nga friend nila, niingon nga ang mga baji daw dili maka-paint or write, dili daw iyang gi-discriminate ba? O iyang gi-praise ang trabaho ni Mr. Ramsay nga isa ka philosophy professor. Kini nga comment ni Charles is naka-offend ni Lily. O nagduha-duha na noon si Lily about sa iyahang pagpaint in a current time. Later still, the Ramsays host in a dinner party at their summer house. A poet named Augustus Carmichael asks for a second bowl of soup, which angers Mr. Ramsay. When their acquaintances Paul, Rayleigh, and Menta Doyle are late to the dinner party because Menta lost her grandmother's brooch on the beach, Mrs. Ramsay gets angry. So after nag-host og dinner party ang Ramsay family sa ilang summer house. Ang point nga si Augustus Carmichael nangutana nya nangayo og isa ka bowl nga sabaw. Mao to'y nakapasako ni Mr. Ramsay. Then nasamutan pa jud pa kasuko kay late ni abot si iyang friend nga si Paul Riley og si Menta Doyle. Kay mong nag-late sila kay nawala daw ang brooch. Ang brooch is mao ni siya ang accessory ang brooch is accessory ni siya sa neck. Nawala adto sa kanang beach. Mao to nasuko og samot si Mrs. Ramsay. In the part 2 of the story, which is Time Passes, is mostly told from an American point of view rather than individual character perspective. Like section 1 in terms of page length, section 2 is short, but 10 years ago, by a novel, this span of 10 years includes the entirety of World War I, 1914 to 1918. 3 of Ramsays also die. Mrs. Ramsay, whose cause of death is unspecified. Their son Andrew, who is killed in World War I, and their daughter Pro, who dies in childbirth. Without his wife to talk to, Mr. Ramsay feels lost, anxious, and like he does not have someone to support him in his work and life. The only character whose internal monologues are featured in section 2 in Mrs. McNabb, who is the Ramsays' housekeeper at their summer house and provides an outsider perspective on how things in family have changed over the decade. So, sa part 2, namatay si Mrs. Ramsay tungod, pero wa ni ba unogon sa hinungdan nganong namatay siya. Ilang anak pod nga si Andrew namatay pod sa World War I. Nya ilang baji pod nga anak si Pro namatay pod pagpanganak ba namatay siya daan. Namatay siya dayon. Tungod adto nag-uol og taman si Mr. Ramsay. Feeling niya wala na siya bisan usa nga nga musuporta niya sa iyang trabaho o sa iyang kinabuhi. Ang karakter nga na internal monologue sa section 2 kay si Mrs. kanang McNabb, ang housekeeper nila sa ilahang summer house na nag-explain og unsay mga kabag-uhan sa hinatabo sa Ramsay family over the decade. So in the part 3, which is the last part of the story, is in the lighthouse. Some of the Ramsay family members and their friends are once again at their summer house 10 years after part 1. Mr. Ramsay decides to take his son James and daughter Camilla on the delayed sailing trip to the lighthouse. They almost do not get to go because the children are not ready to leave in time, but eventually do. On the way, James and Camilla are silent because they resent their father for making them go to the lighthouse, which they are no longer excited about. However, along the way, James is pleasantly surprised because his father praises James' ability to keep the sailboat steady instead of being harsh like he usually is. Camilla also warms up to her father during the trip. So sa last part, which is in part 3, ani nga part sa story is ang Ramsay family nga buhi pa kay adto sa kanang lighthouse kay di ba ang katong mama sa Ramsay family is namatay kay, pero wa ta kay bagong sayras why nabaon og unsay rason ngano namatay siya. Then katong si Propod namatay pagpanganak og katong isa niya ka igsuon namatay pod sa World War I. So ang nakaadto na nagbalik is si Mr. Ramsay, si Camilla ug si James. Sila na lang kay sila may nabuhi pa. Unya kanang ang iyang mga anak dili na excited nga modong adto kay nangluod sila ba kay katubitaw na delayed ang ilahang pag-adto kay wala tong pag-adto gusto unta nila moadto wala ni sugot iyang papa kay lain ba itong panahon. So dili na sila excited nya usap pod kuwang na pod sila. Unya on the way na-surprise si kanang James sa iyang papa kay gipraise siya sa iyang papa ba tungod kay kanang gitaguan niya ang katong kanang sailboat nga steady lang. So gipraise siya kay iyang papa wa siya naanad nga ingana ba kay iyang papa dili man ingana before niya. Si Camilla pod kay gitarong pod niya og trato. So apil pod si Camilla is gitarong na pod trato sa iyang papa. So dili na iyang papa nga si Mr. Ramsay dili na pareha before nga harsh, dili na pareha before nga kanang stricto siguro ingana. While the others sail towards the lighthouse, Lily continues to work on the same portrait of Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay that she had begun in section 1 10 years ago. She tries hard to remember the images in her mind of how their faces looked 10 years ago, and while trying to imagine the late Mrs. Ramsay's face, Lily tries to realize truths about life and death as well. Just as the others in the sailboat reach the lighthouse, Lily finally finishes the painting and feels satisfied with it. She decided that this feeling of satisfaction with the job she has done is more important to her than leaving behind some sort of legacy behind after she dies. This perhaps provides some relief to the anxiety she felt in part 1 about how others perceive her as a women artist. So, diri nga part is si Lily on the other side is nagtiwa siya gama sa kanang portrait nila ni Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay. So iyang gihinumduman ang mga faces nila 10 years ago before namatay. 10 years ago katong pa namatay si Mrs. Ramsay. So iyang imagine og unsay naong nila aron iyang i-paint. Nya paghuman niya og kanang paint, human na siya iyang gitan-aw, then naka-feel siya og satisfaction. Pagtanaw niya is feel niya ang satisfaction sa iyang painting, and then nakuha ng iyang anxiety nga gibati sa part 1 kay di ba namatay iyang mama ato. Then nakagama po siya ato kay tungod adtong mga tao nga nag-perceive niya as a women artist is nagporsige siya. Iyang gi sa tawag gi kuan na niya as strength nga dili porket babae dili na ka mao mo paint. So the main theme of the novel To the Lighthouse is that human experience is varied and complex. The novel illustrates this theme through its structure, which features shifting perspectives between characters. This way, the reader views the inner monologues of several characters. This highlights the subjectivity of experience and inadequacy of spoken language to communicate the full extent of our experience. So, what does the lighthouse symbolize into the lighthouse? Into the lighthouse seems to symbolize truth and meaning. Throughout the book, different characters search for the truth about the meaning of life and death, but it takes a long time to figure it out. This is similar to how James keeps asking to go to the lighthouse, but the family eventually never goes for 10 years until they finally do, which occurs of the same moment that Lily discovers her own personal meaning of life and death. So, what is the moral lesson of the lighthouse? One moral lesson that can be drawn from the novel is the importance of embracing the present moment and appreciating the transient nature of life. The characters in the story grapple with their desires, fears, and the inevitability of change, highlighting the need to find meaning and fulfillment in the present rather than dwelling onto the past or fixating on an uncertain future. Before I will end my discussion, I will give you an activity first. So there are only 5 questions. So first, what is the overall message or takeaway from To the Lighthouse? So the answer is the novel encourages reflection on the complexities of human experience, the impermanence of life, and the pursuit of meaning and connection amidst the ever-shifting tides of time. What challenges do characters face in their pursuit of personal fulfillment? The answer is characters face internal conflicts, societal expectations, and the inevitability of change, highlighting the complexities and struggles involved in finding purpose and fulfillment. The third question is, who wrote the novel To the Lighthouse? The answer is Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf is the one who wrote this novel To the Lighthouse. Fourth is, what role does Mrs. Ramsay play in the story? The answer is, Mrs. Ramsay serves as a central character, embodying warmth and stability. Her presence influences the dynamics among the other characters and shapes their perceptions of life. The last question is, in what year did the novel To the Lighthouse published? So the correct answer is in 1927.